Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I will be premixing some acrylic paint. I will be focusing on the green color today. I will also be making other colors, but that will be in a separate video. I would like to take you guys with my mixing process. I actually don't like to mix acrylic paint at all, especially when I am painting. So I decided to premix those that I like the most and that I tend to use the most. For today's mixing, I got myself a massive tub of white. I don't think I'll be using it for today though, because I don't really use that much white in my greens, but I'm sure it will be very useful for the next mixes like pink and blues. And then I also got some essential colors for mixing greens, which are yellows. So I got a cold yellow PY4 and a warm yellow PY74. And similar to that, I will be using a cold blue and a warm blue. One is PP29, the warm one, and PP15 column 0, it's a cold neutral blue, actually. So for the mixing, I made sure that all the paints that I'm using contain only one pigment, so have a single pigment. And most of the paints that I have here already had single pigments, but I saw that I didn't have the PB15, so that's why I purchased this Le Franc Bourgeois Phthalo Blue, which is PB15 column 0, as well as the massive tub of white, because I always anyway go really fast through white. Here I was hoping that I have enough of this magenta color because I use it really a lot. But I don't think I'll be using these colors for today because I will be mixing greens, but we will see. And these are the essentials for color mixing. Well, I would add a tube of white. I will show that later on. But I do like to make my life a little easier, so I also own some secondary colors. I'll be probably using, but I am not sure, this deep violet or dioxazine violet containing PV23. So the secondary colors I will be using, I'll also make sure that they only contain one pigment. I also picked up this tube of green, which is the Chrome Green Light by Lucas. It's a single pigment paint made with PG17. I actually bought it as a potential substitute for a green that I really love, and that's unfortunately quite toxic. So they state that this paint is opaque, so I'm really curious to see how it performs. I'm hoping that I can mix it with some yellows to recreate that favorite color of mine in a safer way. So here's the original paint I'm trying to replace. It's from Masterclass. It contains both cadmium and cobalt, which are highly toxic, and that's why I decided to stop using it. I used to reach a lot for this color, especially for final touches and bright highlights, because it's quite opaque and it's also quite vibrant. So fingers crossed, I really hope, with this Lucas paint, with some tweaking, I can get a similar result to the Masterclass one. The last secondary color I'll be using is this orange one made with PO73. Most of the green colors that I'm using tend to lean towards olive green, so that's why I decided to incorporate this yellow ochre made with PY42. Just a quick reminder, if you also are thinking about mixing your colors, you can definitely mix your own colors with only these three primaries. However, I personally prefer not to because it's just very frustrating, so that's why I rather have a warm and a cold of each of the primaries. But if you are tight on a budget, you can definitely only stick to these three colors, a white and a black. I also forgot to show this earlier, but I will be using a black. For blacks, I actually don't really need a large tube because I don't use that much of them, and I actually also don't know what pigment is in here. Okay, to mix the paint in, I got myself these jars. I don't know how big they are. I think they're like 60 milliliters or 50, I'm not really sure. But they're really nice because you can stack them together, and they're also like a screw lid, so I'm sure they're airtight. I also got myself this squeeze bottle, I don't know what it is called, and I initially bought it to move all my Sennelier paint into them because It's a great paint. I never use it because I really don't like the nozzle. So, and otherwise I can also put my mix in here, but I think that would be quite difficult. I also got myself some sticks to mix the paint, but you will see I ended up using my palette knife instead. So I'm going to do the swatches on the left so that I remember what mixes I have made and that I can replicate them later on. And first I'm going to swatch this green to see how it looks like, and afterwards I'm also going to swatch the one from Lucas to see how they compare, and then to see also how far I have to mix the color to match the one from the masterclass. I'll be using a lemon yellow and a warm yellow, and I'll add a really tiny bit of white to my palette. I'm not sure if I'm going to use it, but I'll just add it to my palette just to be sure. So first I decided to mix this warm color, so I'm going to use a little bit of green and add some yellow into it to warm it up. And I found this color very pretty, so I decided to swatch it onto my swatch sheet to remember what it is, and I'll also add a note on what colors I used so that I can replicate it later on if I like this color. By the way, I find it very bright and almost even neon, as you can see here. And when I swatched it with a brush, it seemed a little bit transparent, so I'm very curious how this pen is going to behave on top of other colors as it is layered. Now that I tried to replicate the color, though it is a little warmer than what the masterclass color looks like, here I decided to even make it even warmer to see what we can achieve by adding more yellow, because I do use a lot of very warm bright green as last highlights to my painting. I've added a yellow ochre to my palette, and I'm satisfied with the colors that I've mixed before, so I'm now moving on to mixing warm greens. Warm greens here are more olive greens, what I am looking for, and olive greens are often achieved with adding orange or a very warm yellow to a green. Here I've mixed the Lucas green with a yellow ochre. This is already quite of a good olive green, so I'm going to lighten it up by mixing with the previous lemony green that we have mixed. Here are the results, and I varied the ratio of the light green mix I've added to this olive green, where the left one has a little less and the right one a little more. As I said earlier, a way to mix warm greens or olive greens is also to use orange in them. So here I am adding orange to my palette and mixing a really tiny little bit of orange into the green to see what we can get. The result of this mix is very similar to the first mix that we had with yellow ochre. Again, now that I am satisfied with this color, I'm going to lighten it up. This time I'll be using titanium white. In the next mix, I'm going to try to cool down this olive green a little bit because, as you can see, it is quite warm and it leads very strongly towards brown or yellow. So here I'm going to try to make still an olive green, but a little more cold. And for this I'll be using a little more lemon yellow compared to yellow ochre. This way I'll have a little less strong warmth that is given by the yellow ochre. Again, I will lighten this up by using a lemon yellow. Here I can see the difference is very subtle between the warm olive green and the supposed to be cold olive green. So perhaps I could pick the first olive green and then add more lemon yellow into it to achieve the colder version. Here I also added a little bit of white to see how it would look like if it was a bit more opaque. Now I want different shades of green, so I'm adding blues to my palette. Both blues here look very similar, but one of them is cold and one is warm, and a way for me to detect that is to add white to them. As you can see, the phthalo blue turned a little bit more cold, so it leans a little bit more towards green, and the ultramarine blue leans more warm, so it leans a little bit towards red or purple. And if we add green to them, the color that we will achieve would also be very different. And as you can see, I was very pleasantly surprised because mixing this chrome green light with the ultramarine blue made it somewhat turn a little bit gray. Now these greens are not really the type of greens that I am using because they are quite cold green still. So to achieve a cold green, you just mix green with blues. What I'm trying to do here is to make more of a dark green. So I mixed blue and green and I added orange to it. The reason why I added orange to it is because blue and orange are opposite colors. So they are going to sort of make a dark color, but it will also add more warmth to my green. I am not satisfied with these mixes, so I'm going to try to see what happens if I add white to them, and then I'm going to swatch them and note them again so that I remember what mix I have made so that I can replicate them again later on. Until now, I have olive greens, I have very light greens, and I have somewhat dark greens, but I do want a mid-value green that is sort of neutral, so not too warm, but not too cold either. And that's what I'm going to try to do here. I'm mixing the green with a really tiny bit of orange and blue. And then I lighten this up by adding more adding more yellows to it. Now that I'm satisfied with all the color mixes that I've made, I am not trying to make very, very dark green because I don't really have a super dark green yet. What I would do first is to test what dark color I can achieve. And to make a really dark color, I will be mixing blue and orange. The blues I am using here are two different blues, meaning that the result I will get will also be different. As you can see, mixing the ultramarine blue with the orange gave me this sort of very dark grayish purple, whereas mixing the phthalo blue with the orange gave me this sort of brownish, super dark gray blue. So for my mixes, I think I'm going to go with this mix of ultramarine with orange because it looks, for me, it looks more darker than the other one. So here I'm already testing it by adding green into it to see what color we would achieve. One of my favorite ways to also make a dark green is by mixing black and lemon yellow. They're quite dark, so it is hard to recognize them on the palette, but here is how they look like when they are swatched. The left one is the mix of black and lemon yellow, and the right one is the mix of orange and ultramarine blue with a little bit of green. Last but not least, I'm looking for really, really other dark green, similar to this one, but dark as if you added black to it. So what I'm doing here is I have the mix of ultramarine blue with orange, and then I add chrome green light into it, as well as a really tiny bit of black. Then with the leftover of this mix, I will be adding some yellow, warm yellow into it to see what we would get. This yellow is the PY74. And I think this is a nice color, so I'll also be adding it to my swatch list. So what I realized is that I'm very satisfied with the greens I have, though I don't have a green that is suited for backgrounds. Because I am painting a lot of landscapes, here I see I have enough warm greens for the foreground, mid greens for, somewhere in the middle of my landscape, but I don't have something for the background. So here I try to make something a bit more cold by mixing yellow, blue, and some gray into it because I intend to use it for the background. Here are all the mixes and tests I did. If you would like to replicate any of them, feel free to pause the video and take a screenshot. And at this point, I started mixing the paint into the jars. I selected a few colors I liked and I began mixing. I decided not to film the mixing process, so the mixing part, because it got a bit messy. I made quite a few mistakes during the mixing process. Sometimes I used way too much green or way too much yellow. And at one point, I accidentally used the wrong blue. So instead of using PB15, I used PB29. It was quite frustrating and it became quite of a long and tedious process. But here they are. In the end, I ended up choosing 6 colors. I made sure to include a mix of light tones, dark tones, one that works well for the background, and something that's, midish color. I'm really happy with how these turned out. I'll see in the future if I want to mix more, but for now I'll just start with these and see how far they take me. And if I notice I'm always mixing a certain shade, then I'll definitively consider adding it as a premixed color. Now, keep in mind, these won't necessarily stay pure when I'm painting. I'll probably end up mixing them further depending on what I need at that moment. I also noted down the pigments I used for each color, and honestly, I'm really tempted to give them names. Some of them look so pretty. Alright, so here are the mixes I made. The first color is made with PG17, PY4, PY74, and a tiny bit of PW6. The way I listed the pigment here is from the largest amount to the smallest, so with the previous color, PG17 is the main pigment, followed by smaller amounts of PY4 and PY74, and just a touch of PW6. This second color is a mix of PG17, PY4, and PY42. This third color includes PG17, PO73, and PB15. Next, this color is specifically mixed to use as a background color. It's made with PB15, PY42, PW6, and PBK11, so as a gray, and a tiny bit of PG17. This next color I really like to use for darker trees. It includes PB29, PO73, and PG17. And finally, the sixth mix is super simple, just a combination of black and lemon yellow. I'm exactly not sure which pigment I used here for the black. However, I mixed lemon yellow, which is PY4. I hope this color mixes inspired you, and thank you so much for watching until the end. If you're into color mixing, stay tuned because I'll be sharing more videos where I mix other colors too. And that's it for today. I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye!